Go ahead.
Great. Well, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is with the stuff that's gone on with you recently is I've had deaths in my life, grandparents, extended family, but never anything super close.
Mm,
Directly.
yeah.
My grandfather, I had a very torn relationship with him through my childhood. It was, lack of approval, and he spent a lot of time with me. I loved him deeply. I cried when they played taps at the funeral,
Yeah.
but I have not had to go through that deep loss yet, and I know it's coming. I mean, I'm at 30 years old. You're lucky if you get that far without a big one. So
Unless you go, then everybody else gets that.
exactly, there you go. So I'm already past the 27 club for artists, so that's got that one good. But yeah, no, I mean, there's something coming in the next couple years, 5 years, decade. Like something's gonna hit, and I've had loss and pain in my life as we all have. But it's one of those things. There's the saying that comes back a lot of if everyone in the world were to dump their problems in a big pile and offer exchanges, that everyone would humbly take their own problems back and walk back from them. And it very much feels that way. That if I spend more than 5 minutes talking to anyone, I'm like, wow, this person has way more profound tragedy in their life than I've had.
Yeah.
So from someone who's in the midst of it right now to someone who's gone through a lot of life without having to be in that Rubicon, what general advice would you give?
I think, we talked. A lot of life is not so much how you respond to something in the moment, but how prepared for it are you. And so for my sister's funeral and it was a memorial service. I'm working with my brother-in-law. We're going to post it online. I might just post my eulogy on my channel, but it was a profound experience because she was a teacher at a Christian high school.
Mm-hmm.
And she, sudden death, leaving students right there. She's a middle school teacher. And, these poor sixth graders go through the line and they don't know what any of this is about. Yeah. But what that school could bring together and that church community could bring together in terms of the service just was astounding to me as a small church pastor. There was this huge choir that did this amazing choral piece. Mm. One of a former student of hers, or a former alumni, is a professional vocalist, and he did a duet with a woman that was just unbelievable. And so all of that amazing art is within the context of this astounding story that is Christianity, of promise and redemption. And so on one hand, maybe I'll post, I've been waiting for my brother-in-law to post some of this stuff before I post it. But on one hand, your heart is just broken by grief because my baby sister is dead. No, and so then your mind processes all kinds of different things. But on the other hand, so, okay, do I believe in the resurrection? Can I have hope in this moment? Well, you don't just generate that. You don't just say, oh, yeah, this resurrection thing. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That doesn't, it's, we're these weird creatures that grow through time. And so in moments like that, all that so it's everything that my parents were and built into her, and the work that she built into her work as an English teacher in that Christian community, and the life that she devoted into the relationships that she had in church and in school, and the relationships we had in family. In that moment of loss, we have amazing resources that in some ways have been accumulated for generations that now we can call upon. And it doesn't make the suffering not hurt, but it transforms it in a strange way. And that's what I experienced in this. And the same with my father's death. When my father died 5 years ago, there were no loose ends, as often happens with a sudden death. And that was a blessing. But so if someone has lived well, it's an immense comfort. Now, I've also done funerals for people who haven't lived well.
Yeah.
That's harder. And I don't mean it in terms of the Christian narrative of salvation and damnation. I mean just in terms of what the family then has to walk through.
Yeah.
So
that's hard. I mean, that's one of the things that, not having been raised in a church community, is always so hard. Is where do you draw that line in eulogizing someone between being just sugarcoating and being dishonest? It comes up in media all the time. I mean, there's so many TV shows and movies have explored that idea of, how do you approach it? BoJack Horseman did it really beautifully in this last season with the season 5. There's an episode where his mother passes and he does an extended, the whole episode is just a monologue of the eulogy of his mother. And it's very, very deep and esoteric for an animated cartoon show. But yeah, no, it's one of those things that you can't, where do you balance the authenticity and the genuineness and the pain that people sometimes bring to each other's lives, and the devastation they can leave behind in a family. I mean, somebody who's really spent decades mentally and verbally abusing or physically abusing family members. And, what do you do in that moment? And what is that space for? Maybe this isn't the place to air the grievances. Maybe this is the place to put a bow on it, and that's
right. But then what do you do? And so part of what the dynamic of this service was, my sister died suddenly. And what that leaves in the community is a lot of shock and why and anger. A pastor, one of the pastors of my sister's church, did the main eulogy, which was absolutely expected and fine. But I could then, in my eulogy, I expressed more of the anger. And what you want out of a service is for the community to be able to process their stuff together.
Yes.
And
that makes sense.
And so anger is a tricky thing, especially in, say, a Christian context or perhaps a Christian culture where there's a lot of fear of anger, because I can't be mad at God, or I can't be mad at God in this way, or am I mad at God? Or in my experience with people's emotions, people have emotions and they look around for things to have their emotions towards.
Yes. Well, and the neuroscience backs that up. I mean, we have our feelings first, and then we search for interpretations. If you hand somebody a warm drink versus a cold drink, and you introduce them to someone, they'll say the person felt warm or felt cold in their demeanor, and you can replicate that easily across cultures. Like, just like we're hardwired for that. It's very easy, and I relate really deeply there, because I had a lot of anger issues as a kid. I was actually diagnosed ADHD as a child, never medicated, diagnosed again as an adult, when I read through a book that had 25 clinical categorization criteria for ADHD. The only one I didn't have was irrational outbursts of anger, because I went through 3 years of anger management therapy as a child. so
I lit on that one.
Exactly. Well, and that's the thing, is that what I realized in the last 5-10 years is that as a child, what I took from it, and I'm sure this isn't what my anger management therapist was teaching, but what I took as a child was that anger was bad. Put your anger in a little box and don't express anger, because only bad people express anger.
Right.
And that's a very easy message to get in today's society, and we're happy to give that. And the whole toxic masculinity thing ties in there, and we don't want anger, aggression, even just confidence in general. I get a lot of feedback of being over arrogant, overconfident, full of himself, all that, and that are all tied into the same kind of intensive emotions where passion and strength and energy can come from.
That's right.
That is necessary. That's a part of being human. You need to process it. You need to work through it. And I think it's one of the things that I'm struggling with in modern religion is reconciling the teaching I'm getting from reading older sources, and then trying to reconcile that with modern view of Christianity. And there's a lot of people, especially from the rational atheist side, who want to come at it with the hippy dippy Jesus, love everyone, forgive everyone, no matter what, be a doormat, let everybody walk all over you, and turn the other cheek means that you never strike anyone, and you never act out in anger, and you never act out in aggression, and you don't protect yourself, and you don't protect your family, and everything is just lovey-dovey compassion 24/7. And that does not reconcile with my reading of the Bible or with any teacher before the last 50 years.
That's right.
I don't know that there were many who were doing that interpretation of Christianity 100 years ago. So,
and as a culture, then we have these. So the problem is if you can't process it over here, it leaks out over there. So on one hand, we're completely inclusive and we don't say anything bad against anyone, but punch a Nazi. And it's like, oh, okay.
Well, and who's a Nazi? It's everyone you disagree with and anyone
exactly.
I want to it's very easily reconciled. Yeah.
So
the same idea. You see the same thing in any paralleling culture. You have the PETA and the animal rights activists. And you're like, okay, great, that's awesome that you want to support animal rights. That's great. Can we look at the numbers of how many small animals are killed to make your salad? Can we look at the people that you're hurting in your violent protests and trying to protect the lives of these individual supposedly sentient creatures? Right. That's the people just first order consequences is as far as most people get. They don't want to have a long extended conversation. They want to have their emotional outbursts and feel justified. And it ties to the Jungian shadow work stuff that whatever gets suppressed is going to get expressed somewhere. It's going to come out in you through something in your culture. And I think we're seeing that. I think we're in a current time of massively suppressed anger and rage. And I mean, you're seeing right now, just the last couple of days, you had politicians calling for reform in the European acceptance of migration and immigration because of the underlying rage in the population. Like, it's not even, we need to look at these policies for any actual policy reason. We're not saying it's wrong in the direction of too much or wrong in the direction of too little. We're saying people are responding with anger and that is bad. So we must adjust our policies to control the angry response we're getting from people. And that I saw it when I worked in schools, that you would see, a parent who comes in and yells at guidance about their kid being in the wrong class gets their schedule changed. And the parent who comes in and politely requests a shift in their schedule gets pushed back and pushed back and pushed back. So you're training people to be more angry to get the response they need. That's right. And people see that. They see that anger. most people are terrified of anger. And if one thing I've learned in my life is that if you can be the one who sits and calmly listens and speaks back in a calm, measured, reserved tone, that people who are angry hate that more than anything in the world. They just want you to scream in their face to justify their anger. But if you just turn to them with a I mean, I really think that's part of, I'm sure there's depths that I will never understand, but that's part of what turn the other cheek is there's nothing more harmful you can do to a violent enemy than to accept their anger and their rage and their pain and not reflect it back. Yeah. It doesn't mean not defending yourself physically in threat of death, but it does mean that if someone's screaming in your face and you sit and calmly listen and say, okay, I understand where you're coming from. Here's my side of the story. And I feel that we could have a more rational, calm, respectful conversation about this, that they instantly feel like a child, and it reverts all of the dominance in the relationship back to that. So you need some kind of outlet, though. You need a place to put it. And that's, you had mandatory military service could be a thing, sports, you got weightlifting, you got, even just heated debate. I mean, I was in a debate club when I was in middle school, and it was a great chance to get in someone's face and really work on something and get some aggression out that I couldn't get out. I wasn't a sports kid, so I didn't have that. But I think we need that, and these communal events can be a place for that. Yeah. What did you try to do in the eulogy and the service to catalyze that?
Well, I just shared what was on my heart, that, I'm sitting there and I'm looking at my nephew and my nieces and my brother-in-law, and I'm angry because they've been robbed of their mother. And I used, so I'll post it probably in a few days. I used Luke 11. Mm-hmm. John 11 is this amazing passage where, like Peterson says, you can't make these things up. So Jesus has these three friends, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. And Jesus, they're his friends. And Lazarus gets ill. And they send word to Jesus, you're the faith healer. Quick, get back here and heal him so he doesn't die. And Jesus dawdles. And people are like, why are you doing this? And Jesus is saying, I'm going to let him die. And you're like, no, Jesus, that's not what you're supposed to do. So he goes there, and then the sisters they're just torn up. Jesus, if you had gotten here, he wouldn't be dead. And then, so on one hand, Jesus looks like he's kind of above it all, just looking down at everything, playing the strings. But then Jesus gets to Lazarus's tomb, and the Greek there is far more dramatic than the English. A lot of English translations pull their punches.
Yeah.
And Jesus is angry, and he's heartbroken, and he's both of these. And you say, now, wait a minute. You could have avoided this and prevented this. Yeah, I could have. But all of this is, Jesus basically says, all of this is for God's glory and your own good. And they're like, well, who are you to decide these kinds of things? Yeah. I mean, the whole story is in there. And so I talked a little bit about Lazarus and how, Jesus wasn't angry with the Father. That's nowhere in the text. He's just angry at death, that his friend should not be dead. And then, of course, he calls him from the grave, and Lazarus comes out. But that whole scenario is vital, I think, for us, and this is us having permission to be angry at death. And if you read the Psalms in the Old Testament, the Psalms are the prayer book of the Hebrews. It's full of raw emotion. The whole Old Testament it's all the New Testament too. We shouldn't segregate them like that. They're full of raw emotion, and the Bible doesn't have a problem with it. We have the issue because we don't know, how to process.
Yeah, it reminded me what you said of a JP quote of him saying, I don't like the question of do I believe in God because you're trying to put me in a box, and I don't like being put in boxes. And that's it seems it's part of the message of what Jesus was saying there was why didn't you do this thing? Well, it's not your place to put me in a box. You don't get to tell me how the Messiah acts. That's my role. It's beyond your feeble understanding. Don't question me. There's some level of that, which I think is certainly there. I mean, he's certainly a teacher, and so he wants people to understand what he's doing, but there's a long arc for the teacher, and that's you can start a novel in chapter 1 and you say, well, I want to know who the killer is, and you're like, yeah, we're gonna get there, don't worry, but give me a couple chapters to tell you a story, okay, buddy? It's gonna hit a lot harder if you wait to find the reveal at the end. And it's the parables, the teaching story, like from an educator standpoint, and from understanding the neuroscience and everything, like it is good teaching. It is really good teaching, and you save the morals for the end, and that is the important way. And you don't just reveal the whole thing at the very beginning, because then the experience of it doesn't have as much impact. Right. So I can see how just from the educator lens, let alone the other lenses, that was the right approach. That you don't want to just say, oh no, don't worry, I'm going to let him die, but I'm going to resurrect him afterwards and show you that I can even conquer death. It's fine. And no, he wouldn't say that, because that lessens the impact.
Well, actually, he does say it. He tells them. He says, "Well, I'm going to." Lazarus is asleep, and the disciples are like, "Well, we'll just wake him up." Jesus is like, "No, he's dead." The disciples never get it.
Nice. No, interesting.
And so, but all of the tensions are in it, because then suddenly you realize, okay, Jesus is your friend, but he's not. You're not having a friendship with a peer, really, and that has implications that we really don't like. And so the only place you can go then is trust. And then it's like, okay, so Jesus' friends are really pissed at him because they let his brother die. Yep. And Jesus can handle that. Yep. And Jesus says, well, and every parent knows this of a child. So, we talked earlier about having pets so that kids would know. So we had guinea pigs. If you want pets that you'll do a bunch of funerals for, have some guinea pigs.
Yeah, I had some as a kid. Yeah, same idea.
And so I remember standing, standing by, these little places that we would bury our pets, and my children sobbing because they were there when these guinea pigs were born, and they held them and they loved them, and here they're dead. And I always cry at the guinea pig funerals because my kids are crying, and it's like, oh gosh, this is horrible. And you look at the wife and you say, why did we have pets anyway? This is a bad idea.
Yep.
But no, it's not a bad idea. And
it'd be easy to, like, why do we even let our kids outside? She fell and scraped her knee. Why don't we just lock her in the basement forever so that she'll never escape and never get hurt? Like, okay, there's also problems there. How about we just hide death from her? That's the Buddha story. Let's just hide death from him for his entire life. And then he goes out as a 20-something and sees it for the first time and has to go hide for a week and deal with the internal drama and turmoil of that. And like, you can't hide people from the suffering. And like, it's the not Sleeping Beauty, the Snow White, when they don't invite, malevolence to the funeral. And it's like, you got to invite the evil queen to the birth. You got to invite the evil queen. You got to let her be there because she's going to show up either way. And it's better that she shows up when you're ready for her than when you're not ready for her. And that's, with the guinea pigs, you're never more than a few years out from something bad happening. And that's good. You're ready. You can have that conversation with them ahead of time, but you never know when it's coming with grandma or with aunt or with brother or with anything. That's, you gotta get it ready in advance. You gotta build up your arc. You gotta build up the dikes. It's all the same archetypal stories over and over and over again.
And again, as we were talking a little bit before I started recording, it's not just personal, it's communal. That here, and people often will ask me, I'll say, I much rather do funerals than weddings, and people are kind of offended and shocked at that. But at a funeral, if the life and the community have been cultivated, it's, yes, you're brokenhearted, but it's also this, it's hard to describe what it is, but it's everything coming together where you can look into the grave and say, yeah, you took my sister, but you will not win in the end. And you can hold that, and you can have a whole community together. And you don't say that in a trite way. It doesn't feel trite in that context. And with so much grief, people, again, I talked about this in the video I did people have their mirror neurons, and they see the grief, and they're like, I got to say something to make it all better. They're in a better place. Yeah, they're in a better place. Or they're not suffering. They're not suffering. And so, okay, but to feel that comfort, and so we recorded the service, and I watched it once now, and I'll watch it again and again, and it will. Yeah, we don't have words to really capture.
Words aren't made for this.
No.
It's religion, it's art, it's music. But there's certainly there is too long. There's too long to grieve from a practical standpoint. If you're crying all day for the day after a major loss, that's totally understandable. If you're crying all day 40 years later after the loss, and you're still crying all day every day and unable to function in society, you probably have things that you need to deal with, because you should have gotten to a place of integration of that pain by now. It doesn't mean that you're happy about it. It doesn't mean you don't think about it every day, and you can still think of those people every day. But you need to be able to become a part of your community again. But there's also too short. And that's, I think, a lot of people don't recognize that in our society. It reminds me of the Icarus myth. There's an author I like a lot, Seth Godin, who wrote a whole book around this, The Icarus Deception, where he talks about how in modern culture we tell the Icarus story as, you don't fly too close to the sun, or the heat will melt your wax. And that's true, that is part of the story. But there's another part of the story that doesn't get told, which is don't fly too low, because the water from the waves is going to loosen up the wax connection to your wings, and you'll also fall. And so, yes, it's like, okay, we don't want you to be sad forever. And I feel this pain for you, and I don't want you to feel this pain. But maybe 40 minutes after I found out that my sister died is not the time to say, it's all fine, there's no suffering, don't worry, you don't have to be sad about it. Like, it's okay. It's okay to grieve for a while. And we don't know what that number is, but it's somewhere, maybe a day is too short to get over it. Maybe 50 years is too long. And we don't know what the range of, it's one of the things I really admire about Jewish culture, is they have that sort of tradition of, okay, we're all going to sit together. We're going to go through this process together. We have the ritual. You've been through it before on behalf of others, and you've been on the other side, and now you're on this side, and you know that you have to accept this from us because you understood how hard it was for you to offer it in my time of need. And now I'm here to offer it back to you. And you offered it to me 5 years ago when my wife passed, and now I'm here to offer it to you. And that is so powerful. And that's something I feel we lose a lot in modern culture with even those who still are religious often bounce from congregation to congregation. They bounce from denomination to denomination, and so the traditions are different. Things don't feel the same, and that nostalgia, that connection to, oh yeah, when I was 10 I went through this too, and when I was 14, and when I was 12, and when I was 25, and when I was 36, and I went through this with multiple different people, the same traditions, the same songs, the same patterns. I have that to lean back on, instead of having to renew this process every time it happens.
That's right.
It feels like that's happening in culture in general, and in broader society, that we're atomizing, and every experience is supposed to be this unique, genuine expression of our internal spirit, and be yourself and express yourself. And I'm like, cool, yeah, there's definitely value there too, but there's also value in doing things the way they've been done. Maybe they were done that way for a reason, and it's okay to continue to do those things. Even if you say, oh, well, objectively it's not true. Like, okay, but there's comfort in the pattern that you can get, and comfort in the community. There's one of the things you mentioned that stuck out to me was how beautiful the music was. And that's something that exact same performance, with those exact same performers, note for note, exactly the same, in the exact same venue, with the exact same audience, without the context of we're at a funeral celebrating the loss of someone important. That music is different music. That's right. It's not the same music. And like yeah, okay, maybe they sing a little bit louder, and you can hear something of the tears in the tone when they're singing at a funeral. Maybe. But realistically, the fact that it's a funeral matters. It changes the circumstance there. And it changes the art. It really does. And that it's part of it. It's not just notes and rhythms. And that's something that I've struggled with so much as a musician, is that it's easy to get focused on the technicalities, instead of realizing that the technique matters, because poor technique gets in the way of communicating a message and expressing something to people. And that at the end of this, something I've radically transformed on in the last few years is flat out telling the singers I work with, like, I would rather see wrong notes, wrong rhythms, wrong words, wrong pitches, wrong harmony, bad tempo. I'd rather see all of that than see you not try to express a message to your audience. Now, ideally, you don't have any of those errors and you express a beautiful message. That's great. And it sounds like you had a wonderful experience there without a lot of technical errors. But adding 10 technical errors to that performance would not make it less impactful than the exact same performance with pitch perfect accuracy without the broader context. Right. It's the thing that brings us together there. Right. We can all have that experience together.
Which is exactly why preaching at funerals is, I think people are going to hear this weird, it's so easy. Yeah. Because on a normal Sunday morning, everybody's all over the place, and everything's all over the place. At a funeral, it's like, okay, we're not gonna you're in a church, we're gonna talk about death. All of us are going here. We've been here before, and like you said, communities rehearse this over and over. And I often have so now as churches, as the level of participation in general in society, within religious communities, church, of course, is what I know in particular, recedes, people will pop up and someone will die, and they'll be like, well, and it's like, yeah, I'm happy to do a service for you, but aren't there people, and like, but you've never invested in a community, in an institution, within a group of people. And so it's kind of like retiring, and like, well, where's my retirement money? Well, did you put some away every year? Well, no. Well,
it's the ant and the grasshopper. It's coming into winter, and you have no food, and you say, where's all my food? And like, well, somebody was storing away food in the spring and the summer, and it wasn't you. So. And if you build those relationships, you have that too. I mean, that's one of my goals, one of my long-term goals in life, sort of a criteria for knowing that I'm having a successful life, is having people around my community here, but also just broader around the country, where I know that I have a couple dozen people that if I didn't have a place to stay would be happy to have me crash on their couch. Because that's a deeper level of friendship than just, let's hang out, let's get a drink, let's go have a meal, let's hang out and play a game. It's like, if I didn't have a place to stay and I'm in your town, can I crash on your couch for a week? Like, that's pretty intimate. The list of people that I'm allowing that on is pretty short in my list. Like, the longer that list gets, that's a concrete, tangible example of community in a way that I don't, I think you would have that normally in a church. It's like, people who would attend a funeral for me, people who would attend my wedding, people who would come for the baptism of my child.
Yep.
Like these are things you're seeing regularly. In secular society, we don't have a lot of that because it's
That's right.
like it's all casual.
That's
Which is nice because it gives you a lot of freedom, you know, when you
That's
see it in the dating world. It's like, okay, well, let's be super casual. I'm like, okay, great. Freedom gives you some advantages, but there's also some disadvantages. And there's some things you don't get until you commit fully. I'm learning that in my current relationship. That there are
that's right.
beautiful, wonderful, amazing things in relationships that you only get when you are 100% in and there is no out.
That's right.
It's the same with jobs. It's the same with faith. It's the same with music. I tell my singers that all the time, that like you have to go all in. And if it means you make mistakes, that's okay, because you're going to make mistakes. You just have to because there's a level of art you can only achieve if you're willing to risk losing it all. Right. And you see, I mean, it's the one that struck me the most. I don't watch sports much, but we watched the Winter Olympics last year, and what's his name? Shaun White, I think, the really big snowboarder. Somebody had gone through who so this guy had won gold medals previous years. New kid comes in, hasn't won the gold. Goes right before him, second to last one, absolutely killing it, like gets 9.7s, 9.8s, like does a great job. And then you see the returning gold medalist come for the very last one after they get 3 runs each, and he'd already had other ones. They didn't have a high enough score to win. This other kid's beating him, and you see him just leave it all out there on the pipes, and he goes for these huge spins, these crazy moves, and everyone's like, wow, it's amazing. And yeah, that's amazing. But also he could have fallen and snapped his neck. It's a much higher risk that he would have snapped his neck on that than on the previous runs when he wasn't going 110%. Right. And so, like, yes, that is, people get cut off. That happens. You know, you get cancer in your 20s. And like that can happen, and you can have your relationship explode after you gave everything to it. You can move across country for a job, and then they can lay you off a week later. Like those things happen, but there's some advantages you only get when you go in anyway. And that's, you know, the long-term conversation you and I are having is around this leap of faith. And it's, you know, at a certain point, it is stepping over a threshold. It is leaping into the void and not knowing for sure that something will catch you. And sometimes you only get caught when you're willing to take that jump. You know, my girlfriend went skydiving a few months ago, and that's like a very visceral experience of that, you know, where it's like you can't know it's going to be okay until you're out of the plane. You got to actually get out of it. Like, oh, maybe I can test out the parachute on land. Do that. You got to jump out of the plane. That's part of the process. And so that's, you know, it's so hard, and it's the journey of a lifetime, and it there's such an advantage to having the culture and the society around it and being raised in it and having your community in your church. At the same time, we're talking about this advantage versus disadvantage thing. You know, I could very easily see, particularly for someone like me who's so hyper intellectual and hyper rational and always wants to analyze things and figure out the meaning behind them, that if I were raised in a church community, you know, I would just question everything and doubt everything and want better explanations. And the chances that I have a great, you know, expert of apologetics in my congregation are pretty low. So, you know, there's a lot. That's the ones like you know, that I've been getting a lot more into apologetics lately, and people like you. And there's a Catholic bishop, Barron, who's really enjoyable too, who has very similar. I listened to a great talk he gave at Google, where he's just like giving the practical stuff for these guys who are hyper rational, mostly probably, you know, he probably had the crowd of Catholics there who worked at Google. But if you have a crowd at Google, the chances that the room is fully religious are pretty low. I don't know that the tech giants are attracting that right now. So but it was very practical, and it gives you that grounding, which is, it's nice, because I got lucky. I really think that if I was raised in a major metropolitan area, I would have had a much rougher life. I was, you know, relatively rural Maine, you know, relatively isolated from all the crazy cultural shifts, and just sort of nice, stable, you know, the same kids that I went to elementary school, went to my middle school, went to my high school, no real fights, no real drug issues, no real, you know, like never got suspended, nothing really major. Went to a college in my home state, and, you know, awful winter, so we're inside for half the year, and so there's not a lot of trouble you can get into. The worst, people drink too much, and my whole family had problems with drinking, so I didn't drink till after I was 21, so I was able to avoid that one too. And like, you know, I had a massive overeating problem. I was over 300 pounds when I was in college. And
really?
Yeah. So I've lost about 100 since then.
Wow.
And that was my addiction. Yeah, it was again, you know, and I see it with, you know, I read up about bulimia, anorexia, you know, binge eating. It's all control. It's all just, you need some control in your life somehow. And
Yep.
I saw the addiction in my family with smoking and with drinking and with other stuff and gambling and, a variety of stuff. And like, oh, well, I didn't fall prey to any of that. I'm so smart. I have no addictions. And here I am at 300 pounds shoving nachos and cheesecake down my face. So it's, you have, in retrospect, you understand it a little deeper. And so I'm still, struggling through those nowadays. But what I was trying to say is that I feel profoundly blessed to have been in a relatively stable environment through the entirety of my childhood, adolescence, early adulthood, because I didn't have that, a church community, a strong, family tradition, like bringing me up there. I was able to kind of substitute, consistent friend circles, consistent culture, consistent family gatherings. We had the Thanksgivings and the Christmases and the holidays and the weddings, and like those, while not as powerful, I think, as the deep rooted religious traditions, were at least enough to keep me to give me a grounding from which I could construct an identity that was relatively wholesome and not just obsessed with self-expression and individuality at the expense of community and connection and love and faith. And
No, that's I can see that. I can see that. Well, and it's true that the Peterson Harris thing, what Peterson always comes back, there's this residue, there's this vast residue that's in the culture, and it all is connected to old things. And these institutions, when I say institutions, I don't just mean churches, formal things that we can point to that have buildings and officers, but also these practices that carry on generation after generation. They ground us, and you have to feel for those who have not that. And there are many. And I've told this story before. I remember a man dying and his estranged wife. I mean, the family situation was fairly shattered, and I remember I was in the room when the guy was dying a horrible death, and I remember her just embracing her brother, and they were singing a sappy Kenny Rogers song together. And it was like, all right, well, that's what you got. You better work it. And it worked for them for that moment, and it helped them. And so you don't want to get too elitist and hoity-toity about that, because what they had was what they had, and what they needed was each other in that moment. Many people don't even have that. It's
one of the really transformative stories that Peterson told that stuck for me was talking about wrestling, and he would say that how like people need these dramas, these stories that give them a narrative of good and evil, and that something to aspire to, and triumphing over adversity and suffering. And like, okay, you can judge the people who are watching WWE to get that, but like you're getting the same thing from your novels or from your plays or from Harry Potter or from your religious stories. There's more to a lot of these things, but at the end of the day, we have different things that speak to us in different ways. And maybe just maybe hearing your mom sing "Mary Had a Little Lamb" is the most powerful music experience you will ever have in your life.
That's right.
Those things matter. They mean something. That's we can sit from our ivory tower and judge the quality of artistic expression that some of these people are able to. But there's nothing more beautiful than a like stick drawing from your child with a little drawing of her and a drawing of you and a little heart in between, and here's a picture of us, Daddy, and I love you so much. Like, that's way better than a Picasso. I will take that over a Picasso any day.
That's right.
Thank you very much.
That's right.
So there's certainly levels to all of it.
That's right.
We're dancing around a topic that is helping me to segue to one of the things I wanted to talk to you about today. So there's a story that I'll tag at the end there that I would love to get your thought on. But if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to take a couple minutes and just sort of lay out an argument. I'm working on basically my Christmas sermon. I have choir concerts that I put on regularly, and I've had I had a pastor from Minnesota come up to me after my last concert and said, "Young man, that choir concert was the best sermon I've been given in 2 years."
Wow.
And had a woman come up after and say, "You're clearly a very strong Christian man who's speaking with a relationship with Jesus." And then I had friends who were atheists who were just like, "Oh, it was a really fun concert. Great job, man. I loved your inspirational messages and how you tied it all in about living a better life." So like riding that line is very hard.
Yeah.
But I find that the Peterson stuff really helps with that, because he ties it into psychology and to neuroscience and biology and all of that as well. So I think that helps. And then I also think I have a little bit more leeway, because Christmas season enables a little bit more of secular people to talk about the religious side of things, because it is Christmas season, and music is an intrinsic part of that, especially choral music.
Yeah.
So here's the basics of where I'm trying to go with what I want to say, is that we talk a lot about the good news, and that things are good, and that the beauty and the nativity and the gift of Christmas, and that brings us, joy and happiness and joy to the world. The Lord has come, and all these songs speak to this message of things are great and wonderful. We just, one of my choirs just sang a setting of Eagle's Wings, the Psalm 91, and I heard a great sermon the other week about it, talking about how that Satan actually quotes that psalm to Jesus in the desert, saying, oh, well, God will take care of everything, and he'll protect you, and no harm will ever come to you, and you'll have all the power and goodness in the world. And that's not the real message. It's not that things are good. It's that things are horrible and awful, and suffering and malevolence and evil are real, but that you are stronger and more powerful than that suffering and evil, and you can overcome it with the light of God inside you, and the connection of faith and community, and trust in Jesus, and trust in your loved ones, and full, strong, courageous action in the face of adversity, that those things are as powerful or more powerful than the evil and loss in the world. So there's the classic things that, that we all bring up, and that Peterson talks about all the time of, we have poverty, we have amazing advances in technology, we have more peace in the world than we've had in a very long time. Steven Pinker, Better Angels of Our Nature, violence is lowering all around the world, and we're getting more civil rights and more rights for people all around the world. We're bringing people out of poverty. We're traveling to Elon Musk put a car in space. Like, that's insane. That makes no sense. And we did it, and that's cool, because if any other animal put a car in space, it would be the only thing we'd talk about for like a year. If pigs somehow figured out how to put a car in space, it'd be amazing. But because we're humans, we don't think of ourselves as natural phenomenon. And it's just like, oh, wow, that crazy Elon Musk guy did a thing. We're like, no, humans got together and made rockets and sent things into space. That's insane. Yeah. It's really cool. We live at the peak of human civilization. As my one of my shoulder angels, Akira the Don, this musician who does a lot of mixes of motivational speeches, he says a lot, we're at the peak of human civilization. Your ancestors would all be so proud and grateful to live in a society like this, where they could reach these heights. And the King of France couldn't buy everything we have in our pockets with just an iPhone. It's insane. Every pharaoh in Egypt would kill for those resources. But at the same time, there is also bad news. There's wars. There's the fire in California. There's thousands of people hungry and homeless and dying. There are children suffering of disease all around the world. There are awful things too. But we can overcome the awful things together through community, through faith, through work, through strength and confidence to push through the things that seem difficult and insurmountable. And that everything that we feel pride in overcoming was once a thing we felt that we could never overcome. And that's where that strength and growth comes from. And there's a few parallels there. There's the neuroscience, where as you do things that are difficult and get better at them, you wrap myelin sheaths around those neural chains, and you become better and stronger. Research into flow psychology talks about the zone of proximal development from about 3 to 5% outside your comfort zone, where when you're there, you're stretching yourself, you're making some mistakes, you're improving, you're getting better, and you continue to improve over time. You go too much more than that, you fail too much, and you lose motivation. You go too much less than that, you're not growing, you're not developing. In epigenetics, you have parts of your genes that are specifically activated in response to stress and to specific events in your environment. I was just, one of the things that was most motivating to me in losing weight was reading a study that showed that certain genes for being more overweight are turned on in overweight fathers and passed on through the sperm, and that just losing weight before impregnation can lead to those genes being turned off in your children.
Wow.
Yeah, so that like one of the best, if I plan on having kids in the next 2 years, one of the best possible things I could do for them is lose 30 pounds, because it's going to be much harder for them to lose that 30 pounds because it's written into their genes because of me. And that ties back to the whole biblical idea of, it will pass on from generation to generation down 7 generations. And like, yeah, the sins of the father are passed down upon the children. And, you have the abuse of alcoholism in a family, and then you feel justified in drinking because it's what you saw from your parents. And then you end up passing it on to your kids, and you pass it on. And yeah, it sucks to have to overcome that. And we say, oh, well, my parents caused all these problems in my life. Like, yeah, they did. It sucks. But you got 2 choices. You can deal with all this shit, or you can put it on your child and let them deal with it, or put it on your grandchild and let them do you think your 5-year-old daughter deserves to deal with it? No, deal with it. Bear your cross, bear your burden, get over it. And like, yeah, it's awful. It's terrible. It's really awful. Like, it's not fair in any way, but we all have those things. And then the other one that sticks to me is the weightlifting, analogy, that you don't get any stronger by lifting the weights you can already lift. You have to lift heavier weights in order to get stronger. And you can do that emotionally. You can do it mentally. You can do it physically. You can do it spiritually. You can force yourself into uncomfortable positions where you strengthen yourself. And I think that the strongest spiritual guides that I've had in my life are people that are willing to entertain ideas that could completely shatter their faith. They seek them out. And I've seen that from you, that when you come across a resource where you're like, oh, this really, goes against where my spirituality is centered, I got to dig into this and see if there's some meat there for me to work through, as opposed to just closing your ears and saying la 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 and listening to only the people that agree with your ideology. I listen to you as a Calvinist. I listen to Bishop Barron as a Catholic. I listen to the in between, Jordan Peterson-y type people who aren't quite on either side. I've got my Lutheran pastor at the church that I direct. I've got little things coming in from every side, and I can see where they line up, and then I can see where they disagree and say, okay, now enter myself into the picture and say, how does this all line up? So I want to lay out that framework of things are good, things are also bad. The goodness inside you gets more good the more you confront the bad in general. And then the biblical messages that stuck out to me was the temptation in the desert with Satan of the desire for power, the desire for greatness, that internal struggle. And that's for me, for now, I don't know where I sit on the literal existence of Satan and Lucifer, as opposed to just the internal struggles with the evil side of ourselves and the adversarial brother and the Cain and Abel that lives inside of each of us. But to some degree, you have that side. You have Judas who betrays Jesus, who represents the loving friend and the trusted loved one who will betray you. And like yeah, that happens in life. Maybe not to that extreme. You don't necessarily have someone who's beloved as a brother sentencing you to death in exchange for some money, but we're all going to have someone in our life that we trust who betrays us. We're all going to have that internal struggle with desiring something that we know we can get through other means, and the easy victory and the easy power and the easy success at the expense of your moral virtue structure. And then you have the death on the cross, and you have the physical overcoming of even death can be overcome. And that's one of the things that I get from you that I like a lot, is that you do need, to some degree, you need the literal physical resurrection in order to tell the full story. Because otherwise it is just this general metaphor of, oh yeah, no, he can overcome death in a spiritual sense. And like, no, literally he came back and overcame death, that to that extreme, that we do not know what's possible in the universe, and we can reach these heights. There is nothing that the world can throw at you that is not possible to overcome with enough internal strength and enough willingness to confront the darkness in the world. And maybe it's not you that gets to overcome it. Maybe you will die in the process. There are martyrs and saints all throughout history who did everything right and still died. Yeah. And that's Socrates talked about connecting to his demon, and that his any wisdom he had in life came from following the inner voice and that inner light. And that when he was sentenced to death and had the opportunity, all of his friends, the people who sentenced him said, just apologize and leave town and it's fine. And he said, nope, that's, I've lived a good life and I get a chance to put all my affairs in order, and this will probably be more meaningful than anything else. And we still talk about him because of that.
That's right.
That even in death, you can, through Jesus, literal physical resurrection. Right. But with the saints, with the martyrs, with Socrates, you've got people who even in those awful places where they couldn't stop it, you can still keep your internal sense of strength.
Yeah.
And that's, to be, Jordan Peterson talks about, to be the one at the funeral who is able to nurture the family members and support them, instead of being the one who needs the constant nurturing and support from others, to be one who adds light to people's lives. And to think of, a similar analogy would be to be at the electric chair, unjustly for a crime you didn't commit, and to still be able to act out in love in that moment, and to take that last moment to speak in love of your captors and say, look, the quote, forgive them, they know not what they do. To be able to say, hey, I'm completely innocent, and you shouldn't be doing this to me. However, I know that you believe I am guilty, and this doesn't put a mark on your soul. You're good people, and if it comes out one day that I'm innocent, then I hope that you can forgive yourselves for what's happening here, because I know it's not your fault. Everybody who's making this happen doesn't know that what the truth is. Hopefully, you'll find out someday. That is power. I mean, that's insane, and that you get to be that person. Yeah. And that's when I talk to my friends about struggles with family or career or peers, when you're fighting with someone, say, oh, this person is so rude and it's so unfair and it's so unjust. I go, yeah, no, it's awful, but you don't have to be that person, which is awesome, because they're that person. They're an irrational, awful, cruel, unfair, mean person. And yeah, maybe they're able to do something bad to you, get you fired, or yell at you, make you cry, make you lose money, make you lose resources, make you lose family members. Those, they can do things to you, but you get to be the person you are. They have to live with that. They have to live with being that person all day long. And so if you had a choice of being the person who's being screamed at and yelled at and attacked and destroyed, or being the person who is doing those actions, I think most of us would choose to be in that position of feeling the attacks, the slings and arrows from other people, because it's better to be a good person and be attacked than it is to be an immoral, terrible person and live with that for the rest of your life and have your little kingdom of miserable people that you rule over.
And yet we don't.
And yet we don't. No, we forget. I think that's really what it is. We get caught up in the day-to-day minutia of the world, and we lose sight of what's really important.
One of the interesting, the liturgical season of the year that has Christmas in the church tradition is Advent. Mm-hmm. And Advent starts out the church calendar year, and it's about a coming. And obviously the angels sing, the shepherds go. Mm-hmm. This radical other regard that gets practiced and gets embodied in the Christian story of Jesus coming. So Jesus comes, and it's in Philippians 2. Jesus comes and is treated poorly, and because he does so without animosity, is exalted. Because he submits, he's exalted. It's so, talking about this stuff is so difficult because there's all these little pitfalls. Yeah. Because you can, there's always this question of, okay, generosity and justice. Mm-hmm. And generosity only has the valence, the resonance that it has when it's seen with the foil of justice. And justice only has the weight that it has when the wrongdoing is fully appreciated for what has been lost. And the challenge is the challenge as someone who tries to talk about this stuff is always to try to get all of those pieces present and right. Mm-hmm. Because on one hand, when we say, and Peterson says this all the time, okay, you have the power within you to overcome. Well, first question is, who do you mean by you? Do you mean you? You have the English, you have you singular and you plural, and which group of people? And then the question is, so at the end of when Jesus is arrested, Peter has been full of bravado as the chief disciple, and Jesus, when everyone else abandons Jesus, Peter is going to stand there with him. And so right at the end, you have Judas and Peter. And Judas betrays him, and Peter abandons him. And it's a difficult dance on one hand to tell someone you have the power to win this, when maybe they do or maybe they don't. Because, for your child, let's say, someone breaks into your home and they're raping the woman in the house, and the small boy is racked with guilt because he couldn't stop them. Well, you go to that child and you say, no, I never expected you to save your mother. That was not, and the child is guilt-ridden. I have the power within me. No, you don't have that power. And so it's always this dance where we try to figure out again, it's the question of context. What message do we send? And how can that actually be distributed properly in all the infinite multiplicity of human complexity so that they get it? Well, what happens in Advent is that, and again, Peterson is dead on right about this stuff. You have the creator of the universe, and he comes in as what? There's no human being more helpless than a newborn. And so suddenly now we have a drama, and we have the creator of the universe coming in as a newborn, and as many have noticed, being spewed out into this world between feces and urine, being suckled at probably a teenage girl's breast, who is scared to death because no woman who has ever given birth knows what it's like to in a sense have her body splayed open and put her life at risk for this child.
And the death rates were much higher back then too.
Oh, it's crazy.
I mean, nowadays we don't think about that much. You don't usually go into labor thinking, there's a substantial chance I won't come out of this, but at that time it was very substantial. So
you have this, and then you have her husband, who is likely older than her, who has had a dream that says, contrary to every other birth in all of human history, oh, she didn't cheat on you.
No.
God did this. Yeah, right.
It's a big ask. I mean, it's one of the major arguments the atheists make, It's like, hey, it would be a very convenient excuse. Every teen girl got to say that. So
and Joseph knew it. And so all of this stuff comes down into the story. And one of the things that I start doing about this time of year is I listen to Handel's Messiah, usually over and over and over again, because Handel brings all of this stuff and connects the whole story. And so one of the challenges as someone called to speak in these events is, how on earth do you say anything in the midst of all this wealth? And that is so difficult, because all of it is built into the story already. And it's built into, if you as a musician have made the selections, and obviously you do, if you're doing it with children, you do the choral pieces that they can handle, and it's so hard, because, and part of the difficulty is that all these things are true at once.
Yes.
And when Peterson says to people, you have amazing capacity to overcome what you never imagined you could. Oh yeah, that is so true. And you will face dragons you will never slay.
Yep.
And you need a champion that can do that for you. Boy, that's really true too. How do you speak one side without betraying the other? It's so hard.
You have to live in that contradiction too.
Well, and so then how do you then represent it and embody it? And so then you look at your whole score. So you've got, again, Advent, Christmas, you've got all these musical riches. You've got, Wesley's, my father's favorite Christmas carol, Hark the Herald Angels Sing. Just phenomenal. And then who did the music to it? Begins with an M, right?
I don't recall.
Yeah, this phenomenal score to this phenomenal piece of writing. And so then as a preacher, what we often do with Christmas programs is just lessons and carols. And I will maybe do just 5 minutes because
there's only so much you can add.
Well, and so much, I don't want to take away, everything was good except, the preacher just muddied it up with some, with some of his own ideas. Mm-hmm. So it's so hard when you've got all of those riches. And so then, and the difficulty that you have is, as a pastor, you have a whole liturgical year to
build up.
This is what we say in Advent. Mm-hmm. This is what we say in Epiphany. Mm-hmm. This is what we say in Lent. Mm-hmm. This is what we say in Easter. And so you have this entire canvas. Mm-hmm. And so what you have for this is, it's
10
so hard.
Minutes of wrap it all up and put it into a nice little package.
And using words.
Yep.
So it's very difficult. And I would just recommend, as is often the case, go with, as we talked about earlier, C.S. Lewis once made the observation that the person who sets out to be original almost always fails. The person who basically learns the tradition, and this is the same in music, that the great musician masters the fundamentals and then can make a contribution.
Yes.
So
speak from the heart.
Well,
keep it aligned to the
and know the material that's been given to you, and start with that. Start work from the shoulders of the previous generations. And so when you get to Advent, why are the angels singing? Well, why are they singing? Well, who are angels? And why usually in Bible stories, when one angel shows up, someone loses their shit on the floor. That's what happens when one angel shows up. Now, the heavenly host shows up, and they show up to shepherds. Dig into some of that stuff, and you will discover that, Peterson has just kind of cracked this world open for people. But there are immense riches in there that all too often we pastors obscure with our idiocy. Because all these angels show up, and what do they have to say? Well, a king has come, and so then the Magi come, and they're expecting, so we put the stories together, they're expecting a king, and it's this baby, and there's no halo, and there's no glowy, and swaddling clothes means Mary's always changing them, because if you've had a newborn.
Oh, yeah.
So it's...
and there's the leap of faith we were talking about before, that it's, you've been waiting your entire life for this event to arrive, and then it does, and it doesn't look anything like you thought it would. And you can just go back to doubting and leave, or you can stay there and go in fully. That's, they had one of the biggest challenges in the whole Bible, to be spending your whole life and steeped in this tradition to expect a certain thing. And then when it shows up, it's not what you thought it would be. That's right. And I think that we all face that in our lives, that's, right. The thing that we're hoping for. I mean, marriage, kids, career, whatever, it's never the thing that you thought it was going to be when you were so idealistic and so young.
And it's always both. And that's what you are getting. And, so it's,
it has
you're going to discover your strength. You're going to discover your depravity. You get to see them both. Congratulations. Yep. And all in the middle of that is a whole bunch of the mundane and the banal.
The basic day-to-day crap. Yeah.
And so then in a concert, what do you want?
So Paul, who are some of your favorite writers on like Christmas theology? specifically, like Advent? Like, are there any particular books or sermons or speakers that you've loved?
No. I can't
Fair.
think of any.
No?
I just use the text
Mhm.
mostly and then work from there.
Mhm. The text is pretty clear in its
Well,
its description there. Yeah.
but the amazing thing, so as a preacher, you talk about these texts every year.
Mhm.
And so on one hand, that becomes a tremendous challenge because okay, I'm going to work this angle. Okay, I'm going to work at this angle. And then life has changed, so other things come in. But you also, as Peterson notes, the text is inexhaustible.
Mhm.
So go back and so what'll happen is say, okay, well, I'm going to do Luke this year. So start reading Luke and Luke 1, and suddenly I've got Mary, and she's announced, and then she sings this song. And this song is very un-Christmassy because this song is all about God tearing down the tyrants and raising up the lowly. It's like, oh, okay, well, and then you get into, they're going to Bethlehem and angels and shepherds. And then at the end of it, you've got the bringing Jesus to the temple, and Anna shows up, and Simeon shows up. And so my recommendation is go to the text and follow the thread, because there's a reason the church has been camping on this for 2,000 years, and preachers have been camping on it for 2,000 years because it still works. Mm-hmm. And go to the text and follow the thread. And so when you read the text and you find something that you say, well, what's that doing there? Well, start doing some digging. Go and Google it and start
piecing together
and see what comes. And I think in the end you will, and then when you're looking at your whole canvas, because you've probably got all that in your head anyway. Mm-hmm. Oh, these are the pieces we're singing. So this is so I'm reading that, and oh, there's that. Okay, so I'm going to go there, and I'm going to dig into this, and I'm going to explore this. You'll do it.
Thank you. That's really helpful. On that same kind of idea and note, I just love with the last couple minutes to talk to you a little bit about choir music in general, since you spoke a little bit about that the powerful performance you just heard recently, and Loving Messiah, which is one of the pinnacles of the art form. It's what I've spent most of my life in, and I really do feel like there is something special about the unity of singing voices together. Particularly, it's one of the things that when you study classical music, it's easy to breeze over the history of the church with music and to sort of the transition from a cappella music, and as in the church music, and usually the way that the music history kind of wraps a little bow around it and keeps it as a tight soundbite for exams and such, is that the church prioritized homophonic vocal music because everyone needed to be singing the same words at the same time, because the point was to praise the works and name of God, and that if you were not praising the name of God, then music was degenerate. And so polyphonic music with multiple sets of lyrics overlapping each other, you couldn't understand what was being said, so you couldn't properly praise God, so it wasn't appropriate for the church. And instrumental music didn't have words that were praising God, so it wasn't appropriate for church. And then eventually people were able to convince the church, Palestrina and other composers among them, that the value of the broader world of music. And then you get the organs coming in the Baroque period and into the classical period, and you get full consorts and orchestras and these larger works of music, back from that root of the tradition of Gregorian chant, moving into organum with simple two-part, moving into a cappella music for hundreds of years before instruments and real advanced polyphony was allowed in the church setting. And that it always felt simplistic to me, that seems like too basic of an explanation for where the role of music in the church, that the church was trying to use every form of expression possible, the written word, the spoken word, architecture, visual art, sculpture, music, that all of these different modalities are coming together to tell the central story and to help find meaning and connection and community and purpose in life. And I do genuinely believe that choir music, I come from a biased standpoint. I've been doing it my whole life, and it's what I've dedicated my life to. But I do genuinely believe it holds a special role among the arts for there's the spoken language, there's the truthful speech that is the center of self-expression. And we have that classic thing of most people are more afraid of public speaking than they are of death. But most people are more afraid of singing in public than they are of public speaking, I would say, in general.
Yep.
And to sing with others is also a very intimate thing, because singing on your own is a separate activity. When you sing with others, you unify your breath, you unify your brain waves, you unify your heartbeats to the point of literally becoming more of a symbiotic organism than an individual actor, especially when you lose yourself into, I mean, if you're singing the Hallelujah chorus and you're really into it and you are letting yourself go into that music, you really, in many ways, cease to be an individual for the span of that piece, where you are now part of a collective whole.
That's right.
In the same way that you have cells, but your cells are making up your organs.
That's
and
right.
You wouldn't say that all these cells are individual. It's like, no, that's my lung.
That's
and
right.
You wouldn't say, oh, that's my lung. You say, no, that's my body, and my lung is part of my body, but it is my body.
Right.
And that your body becomes a part of this massive ensemble. And for me, it's so much more powerful because the instrument only exists in that crossing over of multiple people with thousands of hours of work collectively through their lives coming together for this unified purpose, in addition to the structure of the place that you're in. A lot of this great choral music was written for the beautiful cathedrals, which carry the sound in a way a modern concert hall doesn't. And the audience being a part of that. You don't get that experience without someone there to hear it. It is, the whole, sound of one hand clapping, tree falls in the woods, is there anyone there to hear it? Is it art? Is it a concert if no one is there listening? If we just show up and get on the risers and we sing our full concert, lights and everything, and then bow and then leave, and there was no one in the seats, did we give a concert, or was that just a dress rehearsal? What's the line? Where does it become? If 2 people are listening, is it a concert now? If 10,000, does it need just one? Those kind of questions are always difficult. But for me, it's this. You get it with group dance, you get it with theater, you get it with orchestra, you get it with sports, you can get it with a lot of different things, but singing is the most direct route to it with the most powerful payoff, because everyone has the same thing down their throat, the same little chunk of meat that flaps together to create vibrations that for some reason speak to us of meaning and purpose and value and beauty. One of my earliest vocal coaches would always have this great little bit where he would ask why do we have vocal cords? We say, for communication, for expression. No. Biologically, evolutionarily, when did vocal cords come about? Why do we have them? What's the primary purpose? And you say, grunts and communication. No. The original purpose was to be able to close off the airways to improve defecation. That was, if you can close off and force a column of air, you can help. So that's where your beautiful singing voice comes from. And yes, communication and crying for your mom and telling your wife that you love her, sure, all those things too. But also, that's the main purpose there. And so there's no reason it should exist. We don't. There's no. It's what you say with the Bible. You wouldn't make this stuff up. If you were creating species from scratch, like singing doesn't seem like the kind of thing to throw in the mix. It doesn't seem that useful. But it arises from this, and it's absolutely amazing. And it's one of the things, Peterson says it all the time, that music is one of the few things in your culture you can't deny anymore. That everything's so easy to rationalize away and just say it's not. But even, I think I said this in our last talk, even the punk rock atheist nihilists listen to their punk rock atheist nihilist music and have an aesthetic experience while they're doing it. And they go to concerts to be in group connections and feel a sense of unity and community through the expression of their punk rock atheist music. And so for me, choral music gets at that more than almost anything else. I know the Lutheran tradition is very strong on that. I know there are certain traditions there. Within your tradition, sort of what does the choral music tradition mean to you?
Well, for one thing, I'll just give a disclaimer. I'm not an expert on this. There are people who are, and I'm not one of them. Another thing, back to what we were just talking about, how many angels show up?
How many?
Multitude of the heavenly host, praising God and saying. Did they, was it?
It wasn't just one showing up as a soloist and singing a beautiful high C. It was.
That's right. And it wasn't one preacher standing up to talk. it was, and you see this, in fact, you find it in the book of Revelation as well, where you have these choirs of angels, where there are, and you have these huge groups. In part of what we're talking about here is also, of course, as you know, technology. Mm-hmm. And so this leads into a question of what's the theology of technology? And that's by no means a simple thing. But as you were talking, I was thinking of, so I have a class that I do called Sierra Leadership Network, and I'm doing an introduction to theology. And in preparing that, I came across this I get it. There's always a lot, because I represent myself publicly as a Calvinist. And people always get hung up on that with determinism and such. But here's a quote from B.B. Warfield, who was a Reformed theologian around the turn of the 19th and 20th century, early 20th century. This is his quote. From each point of view alike, the fundamental principle of Calvinism is seen to reside in its profound sense of God and its reference of everything to him. He who believes in God without reserve and is determined that God shall be God to him in all of his thinking, feeling, doing, throughout all of his individual, social, religious relations is a Calvinist. What Calvinism really represents is a logical, theocentric thinking, a worldview, a religion, a soteriology in which the vision of God in his glory rules all, and the one endeavor is to render to God his rights in every sphere of thought and action. And what that means in this context is you can have your choir and your musicians in a space with no audience, and God is there receiving and also claiming his glory. And so if you ask me, what are these things for? I say they're for glory. And well, I'll tell you, if you're having problems at the other end of your big tube here, you might thank God for that as well.
Amen.
But having it come this way is, it's for glory, and that's what the technology is for, and the effort is for. And one of the things that I see as schools cut back terribly on the arts, they don't. When I was young, I started playing the violin in first grade in the Suzuki method. And here I'm a little first grader, my little violin, and you do that, and you just keep playing and playing, and by the time you get to junior high or high school, we've been playing that instrument for a number of years, and now you can play in an orchestra. And it's the same as when you're singing. If you're doing this thing, and again, we don't know this, we have trouble describing it, putting into words, but we're doing this crazy thing together, and it's producing what I would call glory. And so the angels come down and they sing glory to God in the highest. That's what as a Calvinist, my tradition says, all of this is for glory. So technology is for glory, and people are for glory, and the world is made for glory. And this is where, back to our previous conversation of what to say in the midst of something, one of the most amazing things about God is his hiddenness. And one of the things that is expressed in his hiddenness is his humility, because I would say let's say a composer sneaks into the opera house and watches the performance and is there with the audience and feels the whole thing coming alive. And the greatest composer is the most humble one who sits there and loves nothing better than to see the musicians and the audience and to see the glory and not have to say, yeah, I did this. Yeah, this is about me. No. And God, and that's the crazy thing about God, in that we give glory to God and God says, I'm just going to bless you more. And the blessings go back and forth. And when it comes to the resurrection and the age to come, in my theology, it's the growth of that. And whereas now you have, middle schoolers or high schoolers or adults sometimes, and people carving a little bit of time out, in glory you will have, there's no time limit. Now suddenly there's no limit to what you're, and there'll be struggle and they'll be working on it and they'll be challenged, but the lid's off, baby. You're not going to lose your soloists to the age of decay, and their voices aren't going to decay. And all of the stuff that you have been learning through precious time, through decades, now continues to go. That is an alarmingly joyful and glorious vision. And that, in a sense, so you have this story of Advent. Well, why does Jesus come? Jesus comes to give us this, because someone has to go, and there's a dragon, and that dragon is death, and I can't take that dragon on, and that dragon took my sister, but my hero is coming, and he's going to take death out. And it's not just going to be good news for those who live after death. It's even going to be good news for those who have been death's victim. And as this vision continues to compile, well, gosh, how can we do justice to such a vision? Well, we'll need these vocal cords, and we'll need these scores, and we'll need lots of different people, and we'll need a setting where this can actually reverberate. My sister's, so it was in a modern church that we had her service. And my one disappointment about the recording is that, just like almost every contemporary space, the congregational singing is muffled by design, and they didn't mic it. So you hear the organ playing these amazing hymns. But when I was there, I had the people, and it was amazing.
It's one of the tragedies in choral music is that many people want to secularize what we do, and there's beautiful, amazing, wonderful secular choral music, but there are very, very few spaces that are designed to heighten the singing, and really stone cathedrals are it. There are some modern concert halls, but most of them are built for instrumental music or for theater or for soloists or for amplified music. They're not built for unity of human voice, and the stone cathedrals still are, the ones that are still left, at least. And there's something you get there that you don't get in other places, and the Greeks talked about that. They talked about music as a manifestation of the laws of physics and the laws of architecture, and that all of this ties together, and that it's part of the experience. And it really is. And people don't appreciate that in modern days, that what you said, the context matters, but it's the physical space, the physical architecture of where you are, but also the emotional context and the spiritual context. We talked about at the beginning of the talk that, like, being there for a communal experience that is tied to the loss of someone in the community makes it a more powerful experience, and means that probably people who might just mouth the hymns on Sunday are actually singing out this time, because they don't want to get caught mouthing the hymns at a funeral. So, and maybe it's just that, maybe it's just shame, and that's okay, because it gets them to open up, and then maybe after the first verse they actually feel something, and they realize that maybe they should be singing the hymns a little bit more often. And what I tell my choirs every time I work with them, especially church choirs, is that in the choral world, church choirs are relatively near the bottom of the heap in terms of what people think of in terms of commitment. That most people would think, like, an audition professional ensemble, well, you're going to practice at home, and you're going to study your score, and you're going to work really hard to improve. And if you're in a college choir or a touring choir or a performing, like, pop a cappella kind of choir, you're really going to do a lot of work to drill and to get precise. And then you go to your church choir, and we like to get together, and we're friends, and we're volunteering, and we're not professional singers. And why does it matter so much if our tone sounds like, don't worry about those notes and those words. We mess up the words sometimes, but it's fine, because we're just getting together, and God appreciates our gifts no matter what they are. And even, he just loves us for who we are, and we don't have to aspire to anything better. And so what I tell my choirs is that it's there in the Bible. It says you praise him with singing, praise him with dancing, praise him with the sound of trumpets. It doesn't just say pray with your spoken voice quietly. It says that music is part of what you do, and there are people in the congregation who will never do that for whatever reason, and we may not be able to reach them. But when we sing an anthem in the choir, when we lead the hymns, we are praying on behalf of other people.
That's right.
And it gives us a much higher duty than just performing music to honor the composer and to produce a valuable piece of work that you might do in a professional choir setting. In the church setting, you are it's literally as if someone came to you and said, and had been struck in mute and had some throat cancer or some disease, and wrote you a note that said, please pray for my husband. I don't have a voice anymore to pray, and I think it matters to God that I pray with my spoken voice. I can't do it. Please pray on my behalf.
Right.
You would take that seriously.
That's right.
And a lot of singers don't take it seriously. But it is, most of the, even in a singing congregation, my congregation's a singing congregation. Most of them sing the hymns. But there are people who don't. And even those who do are often very reserved and they're not praising with their voices. They are mouthing along and producing some notes. But that is not praise. That is not glory. It's, as you were saying, that you have to give your all to it to really feel that.
Right.
And so we're doing that on behalf of them. And it's a genuinely sacred responsibility.
Yes.
It is profoundly deep. And I think too few people appreciate how meaningful and powerful that experience is, and what a responsibility it is that with the highest level, it's what we were saying earlier with the context of the funeral, that with the highest level of meaning comes the highest level of responsibility.
That's right.
The speech you gave there, the eulogy you gave, the music that was shared there, the communal experience that was given there was probably more powerful than most of the last couple of services and the last couple of concerts those people gave. But it came with, as we said with the snowboarder, it came with the risk of completely bombing and ruining it. Because if you give a bad eulogy at a major funeral for someone people love, like that's rough. They're going to be talking about that at the reunions.
They might not say anything to you, but
there'll be conversations going on in the side, for a generation. I'm sure. You're like, oh, I can't believe Uncle Paul. Yeah, you can remember that eulogy. Oh, it was so. He used that stupid old story that all the pastors use, and he thought it was so witty and so profound, and like that kind of stuff happens. Same thing with concerts. Same thing with anthems. You go up to there to sing about God, and you mess something up. Like, it means something to these people. It affects them deeply. So yeah. I mean that yes, there's wonderful good news, and yes, there's terrible bad news, and both of those things exist at the same time. And yes, we can overcome the difficulties, and yes, there are difficulties we can't overcome, and there are dragons that will eat us, and there are dragons we can fight, and yes, there are beautiful, meaningful, wonderful, passionate performances we can have, and also that means that sometimes you're going to bomb on stage, and it's not going to go well. And that the only way you get to reach those heights is through the difficult lows. And for me, I really think the next couple of years is swallowing that pride and taking that leap, because at a certain point, there's no rationality that's going to get me there. And it's, there's a door open, there's light coming through under the door, and there's a welcoming hand beckoning on the other end. And I'm worried that the floorboards are going to give out underneath me when I step in. But I think at the end of the day, you got to take that leap. You can't. It's the same thing with the concerts. You can't give a beautiful concert without risking absolute awfulness, because it's very easy to over prepare. As I'm sure you experience with sermons as well. Yeah. Public speaking or performing or singing, if you get it too drilled and too specific and too perfect, it loses that spirit and that soul in the moment. You need that little spark in there. Yeah. And so I don't think that I'll ever come to a perfect rational understanding of faith. I think many have tried and none have succeeded. So.
Well, it's not the kind of thing that can be reduced to that. Yeah. Just like okay, so you've got the congregation, you've got the choir, you've got all the elements. You're in a stone cathedral. You can't reduce that to. It just is what it is. It's the whole thing. Yep. And in the context of a cathedral, it's now you've got the symbolism there. So you're actually representing the glass story. That what we're doing right in this moment is the story of the universe in a box. That's what we're doing. And this is what we do for each other. We ultimately, in my tradition, what we do in worship, we're doing it for God. He's the primary audience, not us. Oh, sometimes we'll have an experience, and sometimes we'll have a bad experience, and but it's okay. But at the same time, just like you said, you've got to do it all for the glory of God. Are you going to bring him a lousy gift? I mean,
that's the thing that's so weird to me. Is whatever I give is good enough for God. God accepts me no matter what. And you go, well, why wouldn't you want to give the best thing? Right. If you genuinely believe what you're doing is on behalf of God, then it's not an excuse for lower standards. No. It's a call to higher standards.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, I
Because
apologize for taking more of your time than we scheduled.
no, that's
always good talking to you.
fine.
This is really great. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Topher, and I'll send you the recording.
I'd appreciate that. Yeah. Take care. God
Okay.
bless.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.